The moment we stepped inside, I felt it, a coldness that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. The house was supposed to be our new beginning. A fresh start for me, my husband Mark, and our little boy Leo. The rooms were large and empty. Our voices echoed strangely off the high ceilings. Mark was so happy. He walked from room to room planning where the furniture would go. He did not seem to feel the strange quiet. It was a heavy silence. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for us to leave. I tried to smile, but my heart felt like a stone in my chest. Something was wrong here. I told myself it was just nerves. Moving is always stressful. The house was old, and old houses have their own smells and sounds. I tried to focus on the good things, the big windows that let in the afternoon light, the beautiful wooden floors that creaked under our feet, but the feeling would not go away. It was a sense of being watched. I would turn around quickly, expecting to see someone standing in a doorway, but there was never anyone there, just empty space and the strange, heavy silence. I felt like an intruder in someone else's home. The house did not want us here. Leo, who was only 5, seemed to feel it too. He stayed close to my leg as we explored. He did not run and shout like he usually did in a new place. He just held my hand tightly. His big brown eyes were wide with a kind of fear I had never seen in him before. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice small and shaky. "I don't like this house." I knelt down and hugged him. I told him it would feel better once all our toys and furniture were here. But I knew I was lying. The problem was not the emptiness. The problem was the house itself. It felt sad. It felt angry. That first night was the worst. We slept on mattresses on the floor in the master bedroom. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every sigh of the wind outside sounded like a person whispering. I lay awake for hours, staring into the darkness. I could feel eyes on me. I knew it sounds crazy, but the feeling was so strong. I felt a presence in the room with us. Something was watching us sleep. Mark snored softly beside me, completely unaware. Leo whimpered in his sleep. I wanted to grab them both and run out into the night, run away from this house and never come back. But where would we go? The days that followed were filled with the noise of unpacking. Boxes were everywhere. The house slowly started to look like our own. But the nights were different. When the sun went down, the house changed. The silence returned, but now it was filled with tiny sounds. I would hear soft footsteps in the hallway when I knew everyone was in bed. Sometimes I would hear what sounded like a woman humming a sad tune. The sound was so faint, I thought I was imagining it. Mark said it was just the pipes or the wind. He had an explanation for everything. He did not want to believe something was wrong. I started to feel like I was going crazy. The feeling of being watched never left me. It was strongest in the long, dark hallway that connected the bedrooms. I hated that hallway. The air there was always colder than the rest of the house. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I would see a shadow move. It would dart from one doorway to another as quick as a thought. When I would turn to look, there was nothing there, just the long, empty hall. I started leaving all the lights on, but it did not help. The shadows just seemed to get darker. One night I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water. The house was completely quiet. Suddenly I heard a soft whisper right behind me. It was so close I felt a puff of cold air on my neck. The whisper said a single word, a name, but it was not a name I knew. My heart stopped. I spun around, my hand flying to my mouth. The kitchen was empty. The back door was locked. There was no one there. I ran back to the bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I did not tell Mark. He would just say I was tired and stressed. He would tell me I was imagining things. But I knew what I heard. The strange events were not just happening to me. Leo started talking about the sad lady. He said she would stand in the corner of his room at night and watch him. He said she was tall and wore a long dark dress. He was not scared of her, he said. He just felt sad for her. I tried to tell myself it was just a child's imagination. Maybe he was having nightmares because of the move. But the way he described her was so clear, so detailed. It sent a shiver down my spine. I started to believe that Leo was seeing the same thing I was feeling. A presence in our new home. A sad, lonely presence. Leo's stories about the sad lady became more frequent. He talked about her like she was a real person. He said her name was Alara. He said she was looking for something she lost. He told me she would walk up and down the hallway at night, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. He said she would sometimes cry softly. I asked him how he knew all this. He just shrugged his little shoulders and said, "She told me." My blood ran cold. My 5-year-old son was having conversations with a ghost that I was starting to believe was real. I felt a deep, chilling fear for my son's safety. I tried to talk to Mark about it again. I told him everything Leo had said. I told him about the whispers and the moving shadows. He just sighed and ran his hand through his hair. He looked tired. He told me that Leo had a big imagination. He said kids make up imaginary friends all the time. He accused me of scaring Leo with my own fears. He said I was projecting my anxiety about the move onto our son. We had a big fight. He said I needed to relax and stop filling Leo's head with nonsense. I felt so alone. He was not listening. He was refusing to see what was right in front of us. One afternoon I found Leo in the hallway. He was sitting on the floor talking to the empty space in front of him. He was smiling. "She likes the picture I drew for her," he said to me without looking up. He pointed to a piece of paper on the floor. I picked it up. It was a child's drawing of a tall, thin woman with long black hair. She had no face, just a blank oval. But her dress was long and dark, just like Leo had described. Around her he had drawn little teardrops. My hand was shaking as I held the drawing. This was not an imaginary friend. This was something else, something much more terrifying. That night the activity in the house grew stronger. We heard a loud bang from downstairs. Mark went to check. He came back a few minutes later looking pale. A heavy book had fallen off a high shelf in the living room. It had landed in the middle of the floor, far from the bookcase. He tried to laugh it off. He said it must have been balanced poorly, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He was starting to feel it too. Later, as I was trying to sleep, I heard the humming again. It was louder this time. It was coming from right outside our bedroom door. It was the sad, lonely tune of the lady in the hallway. Leo's drawings started to change. They were no longer innocent pictures of our family or our dog. Now all he drew was the lady, the faceless woman in the long dark dress. But the drawings became darker, more disturbing. He started using a lot of black and red crayons. In one picture the lady was standing over a little boy's bed. The boy looked just like Leo. In another, she was standing in the hallway, and the walls were covered in red scribbles that looked like scratch marks. The drawings were giving me nightmares. They felt like a warning, a threat against my son. I tried to get him to draw something else. I bought him new coloring books with happy animals and cartoon characters. He would not touch them. He just wanted to draw the lady. He would sit for hours, completely absorbed in his dark creations. His teacher called me from school. She was concerned. She said Leo was not playing with the other children. He was spending all his time alone, drawing the same scary pictures over and over again. She asked if everything was okay at home. I did not know what to tell her. How could I explain that my son was being haunted by a ghost? She would think I was insane. The tension in the house was unbearable. Mark and I were barely speaking. He refused to talk about what was happening. He pretended everything was normal, even though things were getting worse. Doors would slam shut on their own. The television would turn on and off by itself. We would hear the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor in the empty attic above us. I was living in a constant state of fear. I was afraid to be alone in the house. I was terrified for Leo. I felt like I was failing to protect him from this thing that I could not see. One evening I found a new drawing on Leo's bed. This one was the most frightening yet. It showed the lady in the hallway, but this time, she had a face. It was a twisted, angry face with a wide, screaming mouth. Her eyes were just black holes, and in her hand she was holding a shard of broken glass, a jagged piece of a mirror. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I grabbed the drawing and crumpled it into a ball. I knew then that this was not just a sad spirit. This was something angry, something dangerous, and it was getting closer. Mark could not ignore it anymore. The fear was starting to show on his face, and honestly, he was not sleeping well at all. He would jump at every little sound, you know? He finally admitted that something was very wrong with the house, but even then, he still refused to believe it was a ghost. Mark was a practical man, an engineer. He needed a logical explanation, and he insisted there had to be a rational cause for everything that was happening. He said it could be faulty wiring, or maybe the house settling, or even low-frequency sounds that were making us feel anxious and paranoid. He was, well, grasping at straws, trying to find any explanation other than the supernatural one. Then he decided we were being poisoned by carbon monoxide. He said it could cause hallucinations and feelings of dread. He spent a whole Saturday installing new detectors in every room. He checked them obsessively. Of course, they never went off. The air in our house was perfectly safe, at least from any gas, but it was not safe from the presence that filled it. The cold spots were still there. The whispers did not stop. The lady in the hallway continued to walk her nightly path. Mark's logical solution had failed, and his frustration grew. He felt helpless and it made him angry. His next theory was that someone was playing a prank on us. He thought maybe a neighbor was trying to scare us out of the house. He spent hours checking all the windows and doors for signs of a break-in. He even set up a small camera in the hallway, pointed at the spot where I had seen the shadows move. He wanted to catch the prankster in the act. He sat up all night watching the live feed on his laptop. I watched him, my heart aching. He was so desperate to find a logical reason, to prove that the world was still the sane, orderly place he believed it to be. The next morning he was quiet. He looked exhausted and defeated. I asked him if the camera had caught anything. He shook his head slowly. He said the footage was hours of an empty hallway, but then he hesitated. He told me that around 3 in the morning, the camera had suddenly turned off. The battery was full and there was no reason for it to stop working. At the exact moment it went dark, he said he heard it. A woman's soft, sad sigh coming from right behind his chair. He had felt a chill run down his spine. He did not have an explanation for that. The man of logic was finally starting to run out of answers. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. It was late, and the house was filled with that awful, waiting silence. Leo was asleep in his room. Mark and I were in the living room trying to read, but neither of us could concentrate. The air was thick with tension. Suddenly we heard a terrible crash from upstairs. It was the sound of glass shattering. It was so loud, so violent, that we both jumped to our feet. My first thought was Leo. I ran for the stairs with Mark right behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. I was sure something terrible had happened. We burst into Leo's room. He was sitting straight up in his bed, screaming. His eyes were wide with terror. He was pointing at the wall opposite his bed. On that wall had been a large antique mirror that came with the house. Now it was completely shattered. Thousands of tiny pieces of glass covered the floor, but it had not just fallen. It looked as if something had punched it from the inside out. The center of the mirror was blown outward. There was no other damage. Nothing had been thrown at it. It had simply exploded. It was impossible. I rushed to Leo and pulled him into my arms. He was shaking uncontrollably. "She did it, Mommy!" He sobbed into my shoulder. "The lady was angry. She was in the mirror and she got angry and she broke it." He cried for a long time, clinging to me. Mark just stood in the doorway, staring at the shattered glass. He was pale as a ghost himself. All his theories, all his logical explanations, were lying in pieces on the floor along with the broken mirror. He could not deny it anymore. This was not the house settling. This was not a prank. This was real. That night our trust shattered just like the mirror. Mark finally admitted he was scared, but his fear made him want to run. He talked about selling the house, about just leaving everything behind and getting away, but I could not leave. I felt like this thing, this entity, was attached to Leo. I was afraid that if we ran, it would just follow us. I believed we had to face it. We had to find a way to make it leave. Our disagreement became a wall between us. He thought I was being irrational. I thought he was being a coward. We were both terrified, but our fear was pushing us apart instead of bringing us together. After a week of sleeping in our room with the lights on, I knew we needed help. Mark finally agreed, though he was deeply skeptical. I spent hours online searching for anyone who dealt with things like this. I found a man named Arthur Vance. His website called him a paranormal investigator and spiritual cleanser. He had testimonials from families he had supposedly helped. I called him, my voice trembling as I explained what was happening in our house. He listened patiently. He sounded calm and professional. He agreed to come to the house the next day. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Arthur Vance arrived right on time. He was not what I expected. He was a small, neat man in a tweed jacket. He carried a leather briefcase filled with strange-looking gadgets. He had meters to measure electromagnetic fields and special audio recorders for capturing spirit voices. He walked through the house, his devices beeping and whirring. He asked us questions about the history of the house and the things we had experienced. He seemed to take it all very seriously. Mark watched him with a cynical look on his face, but I followed him from room to room, praying he could give us an answer. He spent most of his time in the upstairs hallway and in Leo's room. He stood for a long time in front of the wall where the mirror used to be. He closed his eyes and said he could feel a residual psychic energy. He claimed his EMF meter was showing a significant spike in the hallway. A clear sign of a localized, non-sentient manifestation, he said, as if that explained everything. He spoke in a lot of technical terms that I did not understand. He talked about energy loops and psychic imprints. It all sounded very scientific, but it also felt very cold and detached from the terror we were living through. After about 2 hours, he packed up his briefcase. He sat us down in the living room. He told us that our house had what he called a benign echo. He said it was like a recording of a past event playing over and over. He assured us it was not intelligent and it could not harm us. He said the broken mirror was likely a coincidence, maybe caused by a change in temperature. He told us to ignore the sounds and feelings, and eventually, they would fade. He charged us $300 for his time and left. As his car drove away, I felt all my hope drain away. He was wrong. This was not a harmless echo. This was the angry lady from Leo's drawings. This was a useless visit. Arthur Vance's visit made things worse. It was like his disbelief had angered the spirit in our house. The activity became more constant, more aggressive. The humming in the hallway was no longer soft and sad. It was a low, angry moan that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Doors did not just slam anymore. They would rattle violently in their frames, as if someone was trying to break them down. One morning I came downstairs to find every single kitchen cabinet wide open. All the plates and glasses were neatly stacked on the floor. Nothing was broken. It was a deliberate, chilling display of power. Mark had no more explanations. He was now just as scared as I was. We stopped trying to live a normal life. We huddled together in the living room at night, too afraid to go to our separate beds. Leo slept on a makeshift bed on the sofa between us. The house that was supposed to be our dream home had become our prison. We were trapped inside with something that hated us. We talked about staying in a hotel, but we were afraid to leave the house empty. We were afraid of what we might come back to. The fear was a living thing, a fourth member of our family. The cold spot in the hallway became a permanent fixture. It was an area about 6 feet long, right outside Leo's bedroom door. The air there was icy, like walking into a freezer. You could see your breath in that spot, even when the rest of the house was warm. The dog refused to go near it. He would stand at the end of the hall and whine, his fur standing on end. We all avoided it, walking in a wide circle around the invisible patch of cold. It felt like a gateway, a place where the veil between our world and another was thin. It was her space, the lady's space. One night I was woken by a sound from the hall. It was the sound of weeping. Not the faint crying I had heard before, but deep, heartbroken sobs. It was the sound of pure misery. I sat up in bed, my body frozen with fear. Mark was fast asleep beside me, exhausted from weeks of anxiety. I knew I should stay in bed. I knew I should not go out there, but the sound pulled at me. It was filled with so much pain. Against my better judgment, I slowly got out of bed. I crept to the bedroom door and opened it just a crack. I had to see. I had to know. I peered through the crack in the door. The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint moonlight coming through a window at the far end. My breath caught in my throat. The cold spot was no longer just a patch of cold air, it was glowing. A faint, shimmering bluish light seemed to hang in the air, pulsing softly. The sound of weeping was coming directly from that light. I stood there, my hand over my mouth, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could not move. I could not breathe. I was watching something that was not supposed to exist, something that defied all logic and reason. Slowly the light began to take shape. It swirled and condensed, like smoke gathering in the cold air. An outline began to form within the shimmering haze. It was the shape of a person, a tall, thin figure. My mind screamed at me to close the door, to run and hide, but my body would not obey. I was paralyzed by a mixture of terror and a strange, morbid curiosity. I was finally going to see what had been tormenting my family. I was going to see the lady that my son had been drawing for weeks, the sad lady from the hallway. The figure became clearer, more solid. It was a woman. She was tall and slender with long, dark hair that fell around her shoulders in a tangled mess. She was wearing a long, dark dress that looked like it was from another century. Her back was to me. Her shoulders were shaking with her sobs. She was standing in the exact spot where Leo had sat and talked to his invisible friend. She was real. Everything Leo said was true. She was not an echo. She was not an imaginary friend. She was a ghost, a spirit trapped in our home, drowning in her own sorrow and rage. Then, as if she could feel me watching her, she stopped crying. The terrible sound was replaced by an even more terrible silence. Her shoulders stopped shaking. Slowly, very slowly, she began to turn. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. My throat was tight with fear. She turned her head and her face came into view. It was not a face. It was a blur of pale light, a swirling vortex of shadow and misery. But in the center of that blur, two dark holes opened up. They were eyes, and they were staring directly at me. I saw her. I finally saw her. And she saw me. The haunting was real.